Hi everyone. Um, Once I made a series of videos called Top 10 something. Um, I sort of didn't forget about them. I got busy, right? Um, but this is another one of those, and it's the top 10 American vehicles. So let's go and see what I think about that. So the caveats are, as usual, this is just one guy's opinion. This is based on what I'm actually seeing in competitions, in tournaments around the world, what I'm seeing on tables. So it's all about competitiveness. What is good if you're looking at Americans? There's a little bit of one of them that's a little bit cheeky, but you'll notice that immediately. Um, so And the Americans are sort of weird because they produced most of the good stuff. They had the largest production of any nation in World War II. But if we're looking at the vehicles for the Americans, they're not actually all of them that good. And there are different reasons for that. But especially maybe the American armored car slot really lacks the punch of some of the other nations. So let's go and check out what is good for Americans. First up, honorable mentions. I have to do this. You know this. This is weird, right? But the LVT Buffalo. Come on, it is an amazing. I don't understand why more people don't use this. It's so cool. It's 150 points regular. It's 7 plus open topped, so not that great. It can be pinned quite easily, but you can have 3 machine guns, 2 of them pintle mounted. That's split 3 ways. That's the same points wise as 3 MMG teams regular. And this is armored. Can't be killed by small arms fire. That's really, really cool. And at the same time, you can transport up to 30 men. So you can transport your whole tank platoon worth of infantry. Um, that's really amazing. And you can even transport vehicles in it. It's the only thing that I know of where you can, at least the only thing that's like halfway competitive, where you can put a Jeep inside another vehicle. So what you can do, and this is really out in the pale of shenanigans, you can have a Jeep with a flamethrower team inside your LVT, and then you can have the LVT right up against the deployment zone limit. Then you can turn the LVT, and because it's so large, the turn will actually push you out like 1 or 2 inches into the neutral zone. Then you can move 9 inches. So that's 11 inches from your deployment zone right now. And then the Jeep goes out 12 inches, and then the flamethrower moves out 6 inches, and then you flame 6 inches. You can almost reach stuff on the back line of the enemy's deployment zone with that flamethrower if you have the last 3 dice of a turn. That is insane. That is, if anyone ever does that trick, I want to hear about it. I really want to hear about it if anyone ever did that, because it's so cool. So I have to mention the LVT, but it does not make the cut for the best vehicles here. It's so amazing. I love my LVT. It's quite big, but it's fairly low because it hasn't got a turret. So it's not that tall. You can get a lot of cover for it from just linear obstacles. Really cool. Anyways, enough about my love of the LVT. I know it's weird, but if we look at in 10th place, for me, that's the M3A1, the Satan, which is the Stuart chassis with a flamethrower turret. So it's 135 points. It's an 8 plus tank. It's got vulnerable on all that stuff because it's fairly flimsy. But it's got a turret mounted flamethrower, so 360 flamethrower. Coaxial machine gun, hull mounted machine gun. So it's not the Darker Stuart at all, but that tank is a fairly good version of a flamethrower tank. There are a lot of flamethrower tanks in this game, but this is a cheap one that's fairly survivable. It has other capacities as well. And for me, that pushes it up into a really relevant range for tank choices. Pity though, that some of the other choices are better. Then in ninth place, I have the M29, the Weasel, which is an odd-looking one. It's not pretty at all, but in the game it has some pretty nice special rules. It's 65 points, so fairly expensive for something that's unarmored. It's 7 plus, it's open topped, so you'll get pinned just as usually, but it's got recce. It's one of the only transport vehicles that's got recce, which is really, really good. And turn on the spot, not really needed, but nice to have. It's got a 5-man capacity for transport, which is perfect for an engineer unit. Perfect size for an engineer unit. So for me, the right way to build the M29 is to have 5 engineers with a flamethrower, nothing else, regulars, in this vehicle, sitting behind some area terrain where it can move up and then deliver the engineers, because it's tracked, so you can move through terrain. That is really interesting, and if it's really threatened, you can always recce away and get back behind cover again afterwards. Really an interesting little vehicle for your engineers. In 8th place, I've got the M15 MGMC, which is 35 points regular. It's a 7 plus, and you take it in the tank slot, which is why I don't think you'll see this often in competitive American lists. But it's a pity because it is a half track. It's a lot more mobile than a tracked vehicle, and it's got a 360 heavy autocannon. Although you can buy many different versions of this. This one that I'm presenting here has got a heavy autocannon that's mounted on a turntable, so you can shoot it 360, which is really, really cool. It's got 2 pintle-mounted HMGs, so it shreds light vehicles, and it can pin a lot of enemy Stuarts, and the heavy autocannon is really dangerous for Stuarts as well. But you can buy this with a lot of different weapon loadouts, of course, changing the price level. The main drawbacks for this is, of course, that it's open-topped and it will get killed by anything heavy looking at it. But it is very, very interesting with the mobility of this vehicle and with the ability to pin out or deliver pins to multiple enemy vehicles a turn. So you can actually pin 3 enemy vehicles a turn, which is really cool. So the MGMC, I would look at that if I was you. Then in 7th place is a vehicle that I only really started looking at during the last WTC. It's the Rangerforce M3, which is again a half track. This time mounted with an AT gun, and it's a medium AT gun. So for 130 points, you get a 7 plus. Open-topped half-track with a medium AT gun. Doesn't sound very good, does it? Especially because it's hull-mounted, so you can only shoot to your front. But, and this is what makes this vehicle really interesting, you've got the special rule called shoot and scoot, which means that at the end of your turn, you move up into area terrain, you shoot your medium AT gun, you poke out your face from the area terrain, right? So you can shoot without giving cover. You shoot your medium AT gun. If you get the first dice next turn, you shoot again and then you move back, because after you've shot your medium AT gun, if you give it a fire order, you can advance backwards, which is insane. It's the only vehicle that has this capability. That is extremely good because it means that you are most likely surviving and most likely not getting all those pins that you don't want on your open topped half track. This pushes it to a 7 place for me. That special rule is really beneficial to a tank hunter, and this is what it is. 6th place, Sherman 105mm. That is the howitzer Sherman. The Shermans are, of course, not necessarily great. They are sort of a mid-range for me, and the mid-range tanks are not especially competitive, but The Sherman 105mm it's 195 points, a little bit expensive, but it gets you that magical 9+ tank that most people in competitive lists are not expecting to face off against. So 9+ is key here. Remember though that you have vulnerable sides, so you are going to have to stay a little bit back. You can't just push it up like a Death Star unit. It is not. But it is an extra howitzer, and for some lists, like leaf blower lists, that extra howitzer is key. It's got a coaxial and a hole-mounted MMG as well. It's going to survive most of the enemy's throwback at you because it's 9+, and most likely that the enemy will be shooting at long range. They'll not get into Panzerfaust range if you stay back in your deployment zone. Really nice little addition to a leaf blower list, or to just a list that needs an extra like punch and something survivable. Really good. That is very recommendable. Fifth place for me, that's the M24, the Chaffee. The Chaffee sort of competes a little bit with some of the better tanks in this slot here, but it is a very, very good tank choice, and it's especially good because it's got recce. That is what makes the Chaffee worth it for me. It's 160 points, an 8+ tank. Not great, especially because it hasn't got all the machine guns that makes really great light tanks, right? But it has got a medium anti-tank gun, which is very different from most of the other tanks, is with the exception of one version of the Panzer III. But the Panzer III hasn't got access to recce, which is what makes this the really good light tank hunter. Basically, it's a light tank hunter. That's what it is. And you can do dual. You should always split fire, right? Shoot your whole MG at some infantry or whatever, and then shoot a tank with that medium AT gun. In fourth place, the M3 Lee, the wacky early war tank. The Lee is really, really good, again, because you can split fire. It's 220 points, so very expensive, but it's a 9+ tank, and you get something that is very, very rare. You can actually split fire with anti-tank guns. That is not usual at all. You get a medium hull-mounted anti-tank gun, which is okay, especially because it can go right side as well. It's because it's not a true hull mounted. It sits on like a small turret in the hull, so it can cover the front and the right arc, I think. And then you got a turret-mounted light AT gun with a coaxial machine gun and a cupola-mounted MMG. That is a three-way split of your fire, and you can even offend 2 infantry units at the same time as you're shooting at something else. That is really cool. It's the only tank that can really do this. I think the M3 Lee for me brings a lot of capabilities. The only thing that's the downside is downside, not size. Downside is that it's 220 points, so it does become very expensive. In third place for me is the ultimate tank killer, which is the Armoured Jeep with twin bazookas. 105 points. You get recce, you get 6+ frontal armor, so you can't get killed by small arms fire. It's in the armored car slot, where it really doesn't compete with anything else that's worth it. And it's got twin pintle-mounted bazookas, 360 bazookas. Yes, you've only got 24 inches of range, but you're very maneuverable with a 12-inch move and then 24-inch shoot. That's 36 inches of 2 shots with the bazookas, and the bazookas still have that shape charge, so they don't lose punch power over range, which is really, really, really good for you. There is a little bit of limited availability here. There are some tournaments where it's not allowed in generic platoons, so you're going to have to check up with your TO sometimes whether or not you can bring this, but if you can, this is the best you get in the armored car slot by far, and it's a really good little armored car. Do be mindful though that it is vulnerable to assaults, it's vulnerable to pins, so be wary of that. Second place, the humble Dodge truck. And it comes in so many flavors and shapes and sizes. The Dodge truck is just everywhere, should be everywhere for American armies. It is 31 points regular. You can buy them inexperienced if you're just going to use them as to transport like engineers or whatever. I would get them inexperienced. But you can also buy them regular, and if you buy them regular, I would recommend maybe sticking an MMG on it, because you get a 15-point MMG that can be crew fired, so the crew can shoot it themselves, which is really good. Just sit it in your backline, be that movable MMG. Perfect. It's even cheaper than an MMG team. They're soft skinned. They can transport 8-man, and that's the only thing that's a little bit off for me. 8-man is too big for a skirmish unit, and skirmish units don't want to be transported. It's too big for an engineer unit. It's just a perfect size for an assault unit, but the Americans don't really get any assault units. So the transport capacity is the only thing that sort of annoys me a little bit about the Dodge truck. Otherwise, it's the perfect light vehicle, light truck for most of the jobs that you're ever going to need. If you're buying Americans, buy yourself at least 3 of these Dodge trucks. You will need them at some point, I promise you. And then we come to it. First place, I am sorry, guys and girls. It has to be the Dakar Stuart. There's just no way around this. I know that people are annoyed. I know that people are tired of it. But the M3 Stuart light tank is just points for value. It is the best you can do. It's in the tank slot, knocking out the other tank slots, knocking out the MGMC, knocking out the Sherman. Just for points for value, it's just way more worth it. It's 140 points. It's an 8+. It's got vulnerable sides. Yes. It's got a turret-mounted light AT gun with a coaxial, hull-mounted MG. You can buy the 2 extra LMGs, which I think you should. You can even buy a pintle-mounted LMG, which I have seen people do. I have played it with it myself at times. If you got the 15 points, yes, do it. Otherwise, it's just a temptation to make yourself open-topped. You shouldn't. The key here is that because you're American, you can buy recce for it, and you should always do that. That makes it way more survivable. Put it somewhere near area terrain, in area terrain, where you can recce out of the area terrain with something really threatening comes up to you. It just makes it way, way, way harder for the enemy to kill your Stuart. You should always take recce if you can. That is, right now, hands down, the best tank of the game, because it can split fire, it can destroy an enemy infantry unit a turn. If they don't go down, that enemy infantry unit just gets wiped. It can move away from anything that's threatening tank hunters. So it is hands down the best tank of the game. And it can even, threaten light vehicles, like other light tanks. It's not nothing, that light anti-tank gun. So that is, of course, the best tank of the American list. That was my top 10. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments if there are other things you would like me to do top 10 for. I will see you in the next video. Cheers.